Questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQs Live here on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there short and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. A workers' rights bill is put before Parliament today by the party that won a landslide majority, saying they'd stand up for working people. But will it actually improve the lot of the ordinary worker? Suella Braverman was due to go to Cambridge University to give a speech, but I'm afraid she has been hounded out. Is free speech now dead in British universities? And the famous actress Florence Pugh's dad, Clint, who's been on this show before, has now had to close down a business on the outskirts of Oxford because of low traffic neighbourhoods. Do councils actually think about businesses when they do these things? All of that comes in just a moment after the news with Sophia Wensler.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening. Your headlines at 7 o'clock. At least 10 people have been killed by tornadoes in Florida, while the state's governor warns about more flooding ahead. Giving an update a short while ago, Ron DeSantis said crews are involved in dozens of rescues, but he sensed that it will stabilise and it was not the worst-case scenario. 3 million homes were without power, but Mr DeSantis says thousands have now been restored, while over 80,000 people are still seeking shelter. Water levels are still expected to rise despite the storm clearing, with major flooding anticipated in several rivers across the state. Now, back in the UK, nearly 400 people have already been jailed following this summer's violent disorder. New data reveals that 388 people have been sentenced to immediate custody, nearly half of all those who've appeared in court. In total, over 800 people have faced initial hearings, with almost 500 cases completed and 324 still ongoing. Meanwhile, the Princess of Wales has made a surprise visit to Southport to meet the families of the 3 girls who died following the knife attack this summer. The royal couple also met one of the dance teachers who was leading the session and first responders at the scene. The unannounced trip was Prince William and Princess Catherine's first joint official outing since the princess's course of chemotherapy cancer treatment ended in the summer. In other news, Robert Jenrick says the Conservatives must offer a complete break from Labour's failing agenda if he becomes leader. Marking the first full day of campaigning for the remaining 2 Tory leadership candidates, he claims Labour doesn't care about migration. He also warned his party won't survive if they don't get serious about fixing immigration first, promising to cap migration at tens of thousands if he becomes leader.
The age of mass migration has made any of us richer. In the 25 years since Tony Blair became Prime Minister, 5.9 million people net have come into our country. And yet this has been an era marked by low economic growth and poor productivity growth. I think it has stopped companies from investing in the skills and the technology that are needed to support British workers and to drive our economy forwards, as well as putting massive pressure on housing and public services. So I think we can do better than that. What I want to do is end mass migration and fire up our economy.
And millions of workers could gain new rights under the government's Employment Rights Bill, which promises the biggest overhaul of workers' protections in a generation. The bill would end 0-hours contracts, so-called fire and rehire practices, and extend parental leave and sick pay from day one of employment. Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner says the changes will give workers more security, but some businesses are concerned about the practical impact. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. Now it's back to Nigel.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening. This government was elected with a thumping majority. Yes, I know the first past the post system can produce unusual results, but that is what we have. And very much, they said, we're the party, we're the government on the side of working people, on the side of ordinary folk. That was what Labour was saying. So yesterday we had votes in the House of Commons on new renters' rights. Now, to be honest, this was not much more than a continuation of what the Conservative Party were doing anyway. But the idea is, you can't be told that you have to leave a rented property. The idea being that it's fairer on people that are renting, and it gives them protection in other ways against bad landlords, of which, of course, there are some. And the same principle goes, of course, for employers. Undoubtedly, there are some beastly employers out there, but most of them are decent people. But when you look at what was put in the House of Commons today, the right to claim against unfair dismissal from day one of being employed, well, that, of course, does give workers remarkable rights, but I pick out that. And there are many, many other things here. 0 hours contracts, well, actually, people on 0 hours would be able to gain guaranteed hours if they ask for it under this legislation. There's a whole raft of proposals here to improve the rights of employees. The whole thing, of course, is an absolute bonanza for the lawyers. The reactions to it, well, the trade unions would like it to have gone further, and the Federation of Small Businesses say, how on earth can we put up with all of these extra costs? But take the two together. Take renters' rights, take workers' rights, and let's work on the basis that the government genuinely and sincerely want to help people in those categories. My question is, does legislation like this actually improve the lives of ordinary people, or does it potentially make it more difficult? Because there isn't much point to employment rights if there aren't enough jobs out there. And certainly when it comes to renters' rights, I think what you're going to see are a significant number of private properties on the rental market withdrawn and prices going up even further. Give me your thoughts. Does this legislation improve the lives of ordinary folk? Farage at gbnews.com. Now, I am joined by Kwasi Kwarteng, former Conservative Member of Parliament and Chancellor, and Lloyd Russell-Moyle, former Labour MP. Lloyd, what do you make of, all these new deals and the setting up of a Fair Work Agency? I mean, this was one of the big pictures in the election, wasn't it?
Yes, and I think it's about rebalancing rights, and the Labour Party would say it's about fairness, about making sure that when the balance has got askew, they will sort it out. And I think on renters' rights, there's a pretty clear consensus from the established parties, that this is something that needs to be done. I'm not sure I buy your argument that people will leave the market. I think small mom-and-pop renters might well do, but what we see is the rental market increasing in size, not decreasing in size, but the number of landlords decreasing. So what you're seeing is a landlord that has
big private equity.
Private equity. Yeah, actually, for most renters, and if you look in Europe and other places, private equity is quite a good landlord, because they aren't skimping and saving. They aren't coming in, your toilet's broken, and the landlord who just has one property says, oh, don't worry, I'll come round and fix it myself with my screwdriver. Private equity, they employ the people to do it and fix it. They've got the tradesmen that have 100 toilets in the back garage. They just install a new one and sort it out.
But the worry,
some
Lloyd,
of that, I think, is far...
But the worry is the rise in rentals is truly astonishing. Truly astonishing. We're looking at 20% to 25% rise on average in rental properties across England since 2021. We have an exploding population. We have a limited amount of housing stock. I actually genuinely, and you might be right, private equity might buy it all up, but I think all the advantages, quasi buy-to-let, buy-to-let was a big thing.
It was.
And the Conservative government kind of cracked down on it. You couldn't write off the cost of a mortgage in terms of the tax allowances and all of that.
So the reason why Labour had to go back to the renters' rights was that when Gove introduced it in the last Parliament, we didn't have the votes because a lot of Conservative MPs objected to a lot of the things that he was trying to do on the grounds that he was driving out, as we've discussed, private landlords. And we can all say, well, it's all very well for private equity to hoover it all up. But actually, for people who wanted to save a bit of money, who wanted a bit of a return on their savings, you know, the one way that they could get a good return was by investing in maybe a couple of flats or one flat, just a very small portfolio, and rent out the properties. And that was, for many people, a form of pension. And I think it's a great shame, actually, if you're going to essentially drive out the private landlords and leave it to huge.
Well, and this it's very interesting. I was down in Cornwall at the weekend, just for a couple of days, and very interesting, talking to people about how much quieter the summer had been in Cornwall, and how many for sale signs there were.
Sure.
And these were people who'd bought properties in Cornwall, and they were using Airbnb, etc., to rent out, and now they're saying it's getting harder and harder and harder, let alone the environmental performance certificates that they've all got to comply with by 2030. So certainly in terms of, and this is a different subject, but it's similar, in terms of short-term holiday availability, there's less of it.
That's right.
I've seen other reports from South Devon saying much the same thing. I just feel, Lloyd, this kicks through.
What?
I mean, it's interesting. You are describing something as if it is a negative thing, that we're seeing less short-term lets in people's homes. I see that as a positive thing.
You're essentially arguing in favour of big capitalists, private equity people with very deep pockets.
I think there has been
running the rental market.
There has been a big problem that we have treated houses like a surefire investment that give good returns but never have any risk. And the problem with that is it skews the rest of the investment market, because what happens is if everyone says, well, I never have a risk in this and I'm getting double-digit figure returns over...
They're not really. I mean, the returns are a lot more.
There are good times and bad times.
They were at points, and we haven't had a real recession in the housing market, kind of where it's actually reduced, the equity is reduced in house prices for probably about 15, 20 plus years for a long time. And actually, what I think we need to do is find financial mechanisms for people to invest in other secure ways.
Well, I get that.
And actually say that housing is not something that we expect to be billions.
So look, Lloyd, I tell you what, with immigration numbers running at the rate they are, you can see why investing in property has been a good thing.
Yeah,
that's right.
But per head of population, we have the same number of bedrooms in this country as we did in 1970 to 1975. It's not like we have some huge historic shortage. What we do have is people living very differently.
Of course, we live differently.
And so that does mean that we need to build and do all those things as well.
Well, that's okay. That's okay. But I want to stick on the legislation. I want to just go back again to employment rights. You know, for small businesses, and there are still about 5.5 million small businesses and sole traders in the country, they were really pretty angry with the last Conservative government. The IR35 rules on self-employment, the rises in corporation tax, many of those other things. The worry, Lloyd, is that if you're a small company and you're just about getting by and you take on staff and somebody could quite vexatiously go for unfair dismissal on day one. That's not good for small businesses. Is there not an argument with what Labour are doing? Is there not an argument for some kind of exemption or derogation for smaller businesses?
Well, we don't, in the rest of employment law, usually say this is for small business, this is for big businesses.
Because the employment law we've got all came from Europe. We're in charge of this now.
No, I know, but I'm just saying that's not the standard that we currently have. And a lot of these things, I think most businesses already comply with. Whilst we're talking about being able to claim for unfair dismissal from day one, we're also talking about having a probation period there where you can be fired without having to give a reason based on your company.
Unless the employee says, but they did something awful. I mean, it's confusing.
So let's see what... Can I just say, look, as far as the parliamentary process is concerned, my understanding is that the bill has been published. So we haven't even had a second reading.
No.
So there'll be lots of consultation. And I strongly suspect that a lot of the provisions will be watered down, amended.
They will be amended
once they've listened to
make sure there's a right balance.
Absolutely right. But I think what Nigel's saying is broadly true. I think if you continue to put burdens on small business. And they're the engine of the economy, really. I mean, you say that there are 5 million small businesses, but they employ millions of people. And if you put regulation on them, you put tax on them, you're essentially going to strangle growth.
I worry
and that's
about
something that we should be all be very concerned about.
For example, being able to apply for statutory sick pay, which small businesses can draw down from the government from the first day of being sick, rather than having to wait 4 days, actually will help small businesses.
But what about
at the moment, small businesses don't accept those sick people in, and they just have to cover the
totally get that. But what about the maternity leave? I mean, from day one. I mean, now you have to wait 6 months. Under the proposals that I've seen, you get maternity leave
day one
from
rights.
day one.
Day one rights.
And I'm afraid in the real world, that's going to put people off.
No,
I mean,
for
it's
small employers. Look, there are some elements of this that make sense. I think the 0 hours compromise they've reached makes sense.
Yeah.
If you don't want to be on 0 hours, you can say to your employer, please give me regular rights.
You've had a certain amount of hours
but equally, the trade unions wanted to ban 0 hours contracts completely when they do actually suit some people. So there are some things in here that I think are sensible. And I just fear, and Kwasi backs me up, I just fear that it's unfair. And I think we need to change the way we think. Well, Reagan, it's a long time ago, but Reagan had a different set of employment rules for firms with less than 20 employees, fewer than 20 employees.
Yeah, we should
and I wonder whether that's where we ought to be going.
So where the department, and I was obviously responsible for it for a brief time, the Treasury will object because they don't like cliff edges. The problem with those saying, OK, 20, what happens if you employ 21 or 22? There's all of that. But I think broadly your approach has to be the right one, because we can't simply just burden smaller businesses with endless tax and regulation. We can't do that.
Well, on some of these things, maternity pay is a good example. Is there a role for the state to help contribute more for small business?
Yeah, but who's going to pay
which
for that?
does happen.
But what I mean
in
is,
Scandinavia, that does happen.
You might say, if you're a business, so rather than changing the rights of the individual, you say, if you're a small business under 20, the government, the taxman, will help contribute a greater amount to that maternity pay from day one,
something that
compared to if you're a big business. So I think that there are compromises that you can do at the back end for the size of business that don't derogate from the rights
how
of the
the thing develops.
Well, Lloyd's point leads us on very nicely to the budget.
Okay.
I can't remember.
About that.
Do you know what? I can't remember a budget that's been more keenly anticipated, either in a good or a bad way, for many, many years. But it is the talk of the town.
Sure.
And when we come back in a minute, we're going to discuss the fact that the Institute for Fiscal Studies have said that actually the Chancellor will need to raise taxes by a staggering $25 billion to prevent austerity. In a minute we debate, are the IFS right? And what on earth does it mean for all of us?
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
We shot with the London Eye in the background, so it's quite an iconic shoot to do my cover of the Playboy magazine.
And you moved into the mansion for a while. Hugh called you the British Carmen Electra. You were one of his favourites, and it's renowned for its parties, of course, over there. You must have had a few of those. Must have been wild times.
Fantastic parties, yeah. I mean, I met some incredible people. I will forever respect him and everyone at Playboy for the love and the support.
And you were on giant billboards, you were modelling for Nike, for Reebok, you're earning thousands of pounds a day.
Wow.
Absolutely like living the dream in terms of a model's lifestyle, and then things began to change.
Well, I've been living in Windsor for 4 years, and I can't get back into Windsor at the moment. The rents have gone ridiculous. I was paying $550 a month, and then the landlord just turned around one day and said I need to be paying $750. And I didn't really have a proper tenancy agreement, and I looked through it and I said, oh, can we get something in writing? And he was like, oh. So in the end, I wrote a tenancy agreement out from off the internet and I got it all signed. But then he went, if you're not going to pay the extra £250 a month, then you're going to have to move out. And I was like, well, you're going to have to give me 4 weeks. I can't just move out. I've got nowhere to go. And I think he thought he could just throw me out there and then. And he said, I've got someone that's going to move in that's going to pay £700-800 a month. So I went and got the 10, and I thought maybe this will be the way I can go for a few months or so, you know. And it was still summer a few months back when I became homeless. So, you know, I got the 10 and I got all the cooking equipment and what have you from the money I got from some of the jobs I did. And I thought, you know what, I'm gonna go and be a free spirit for a bit, and I'm gonna have to just do my own thing. And you know what, it was the biggest mental relief. to be able to have my own space. I mean, that was so liberating. Absolutely.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In just over 10 minutes' time, Suella Braverman will be on the show down the line telling us why she couldn't go to give a speech at Cambridge University, and we'll debate this topic. And we've talked about it before, whether free speech is now effectively dead at Britain's universities. But back to the debates about legislation and about money and some feedback from you, the audience. I said I'm really working on the basis that Labour are well-intentioned, but will it help? A little bit of audience feedback. Tessa says additional workers' rights will be a charter for abuse of employers. If we had real communism, socialism here, workers would have no rights at all. A new Bill of Workers' Rights will lead to the annihilation of small and medium-sized businesses. Well, I hope very much, Tessa, that you're wrong, but I'm fearful. Hilda says, I have 3 properties that we let, which don't quite make the magic. It is Rayner and Miliband that will force me to sell and evict them. They are the villains causing grief to ordinary people, not the landlords. And certainly, Hilda, with older properties, if you're going to be able to meet these EPC standards that Miliband thinks that you've got to by 2030, it is pretty much impossible. Budgets. We're debating budgets, so we have Kwasi on the show. What could be better? Now...
Thank you very much.
Well, I meant
Nigel.
Almost serious. No, I did mean it. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist it. So,
very happy to you.
So what do we know? What do we know? We know that the government already had £9 billion worth of tax rises coming, and that the Institute for Fiscal Studies have come out overnight and said that actually it's going to need to be £25 billion worth of tax rises for there not to be austerity, for there not to be cuts to public spending. And this has a lot to do with population growth, doesn't it?
Has something to do with it, but it's also got something to do with the fact, well, and it's related, that public spending has just gone through the roof. I mean, when I was elected in 2010, we spent £700 billion. That sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money. It was think of it as £700. When I became Chancellor in 22, we were spending £1 trillion. So that was £1,000. So £700 for every £700 we're spending 1,000 in 22. And when you say to people in the Treasury or wherever it is, can you reduce the cost by 5%? Can you take out 5% of your costs? Most of your viewers would be able to do that in their household.
In a private business or a household budget.
That's right, in their private lives. As far as the state is concerned, it's practically impossible to do that because there are so many interests, there's so many pressure groups that it's very, very difficult to reduce spending. And that was actually one of the ways we went wrong with the mini budget, was that we didn't have a serious line on how we were going to reduce or control spending. Yeah. And of course, you can't just reduce taxes without having something to say on spending in terms of restraint and reducing it. And that was where I think the market obviously got very jittery.
Unfunded tax cuts.
Yeah, all of that. So where we are now is the opposite, where essentially, because growth levels are low, we're not getting the revenue in because the economy isn't expanding as quickly as it needs to be. In order to pay for the public service and the public sector, you have to raise taxes. And my issue with that is that the raising of the taxes actually means you're not going to get the growth because you're disincentivizing.
It's a heck of a tough job for Rachel Reeves, and no one's pretending otherwise. But, I mean, Starmer gave us this, things can only get worse speech. I've never heard doom and gloom like it in all my life.
Bizarre, yeah.
How bad do you think it's going to be?
Well, I still can't quite tell whether it is trying to roll the pitch in a way that gives us an element of relief when they
come in. I think that's what they're doing.
I think there's an element of that. And I think there's also an element of even these numbers being inflated so that when they say that we've managed to find something out of the hat, it's fine. However, I actually don't think that is such a huge number. You could change some of the national insurance thresholds. You could change the way that other income other than earned income, worked for income, is taxed. And you would generate about 25 billion just in those...
So what you're talking about here, this unearned income phrase, which Jeremy Hunt used to use liberally.
That's right.
But a lot of it's risk capital, you know. It's people put money into businesses, into investments, and more often than not, they lose the lot. So if you overtax people taking those risks, I don't know. I mean, back in the 80s, Thatcher kind of did put capital gains tax up, kind of in line with income tax.
They did that. But look, so the problem I have with this is that, we're just within, 3 months of Labour coming in?
Yeah.
And their first budget, they pretty much signalled we're going to put taxes up, It's not quite Dennis Healey, we're going to, tax the rich with a pipsqueak. But they've said, they've made their intentions clear. And I think they're trying to manage expectations. So when they just raise taxes a little bit, everyone will be giving a sigh of relief. My problem with this is that, OK, your first budget, you're going to put up taxes. If for whatever reason that we don't get the growth in 2 or 3 years, they're going to do it again. The IFS will say, this is where your public spending is. There's no appetite in Labour at all to reduce public spending. And in order to kind of meet the shortfall, they're going to come back with rattling the tin and saying we're going to have to put taxes up again. I think that's the big problem I have.
That point, it's difficult to do all the things the government's doing and expect growth to be any better than anemic.
Well, unless you create growth. I mean, that's the old Keynesian kind of model, isn't it?
We've been doing that every year for years.
Well, yes and no. We've been doing it in terms of paying the day-to-day bill. And we've been doing some infrastructure projects, but we're actually pretty bad at infrastructure projects in this country. And we're bad at doing them when they get cheap. So by that I mean, when you build a nuclear power station, it becomes cheaper on the 3rd and 4th and 5th one that you do. The first 2 are always the most expensive. What did we agree to do? We only have agreed to build 2 nuclear power stations, and now we're talking about using a completely different technology for the set of nuclear power stations
that is a very, very fair point to end that particular segment on, and we will be talking budget every day, I think, between now and the 30th of October. Transport for London, yes, don't you just love them, and Sadiq Khan. So you're not allowed to advertise on the Underground anything like biscuits, they're banned, obviously. Cakes are banned, fattening fizzy drinks are banned, but this advertisement has appeared in the last couple of days. Now, join the money revolution, Wahid. So what's this all about? Well, it's advertising Islamic finance, because in the Islamic world, you're not allowed to earn interest. There are other ways that you have to do things. But what is totally extraordinary about all of this is that the preacher that you see here often uses phrases like all homosexuals are filthy and disgusting, etc. It's just unbelievable. It's almost unthinkable that Khan can allow somebody who I think for any of the rest of us would be described as a religious extremist, and yet this is considered to be acceptable on the Underground. I mean, it's no wonder people can't stand Khan.
Well, people don't mind him that much. He's won the 3 elections, so let's not be too hyperbolic about it. Look, I think that there is a problem when you start restricting what you can put on advertising, because then everyone will come along and say, what about this, what about that? I think generally a free speech approach and a free advertising approach should be deployed, and I include all different...
So Mufti Menk's OK, yeah?
Well, look, I think that the danger is, as soon as you start looking into the background of every person that's on every poster, you will find that there are some people that will be able
honestly, you don't believe that, do you? Really?
If it had been a far-right, in inverted commas, agitator who'd said some awful things about people of colour and women...
Wouldn't be there for a moment.
He wouldn't have lasted a second on that wall.
There,
you know that.
There needs to be levels of
true.
criminality. There needs to be levels of where they have broken the rules. But I think that broadly it would be better to have a more liberal approach rather than a more draconian approach, which is what they have on. You can't advertise cakes, which seems ridiculous to me.
That's absurd.
And so therefore,
that is absurd.
And therefore, of course, this looks even worse because you have horrible people then on your posters.
You know that there's a differential treatment. I mean, I know people got in trouble for saying two-tier.
Two-tier.
All that sort of stuff.
Of course it's two-tier.
But
it's all two-tier.
You know, and there's a radicalism.
Well, I tell you where it is two-tier.
Homosexuals are disgusting.
Yeah, well, that's...
And he's plastered across the
That's what we've
underground.
got. It's two-tier. By the way, we have two-tier debates at universities coming up in a moment. Suella Braverman. Everything's two-tier.
Hello, good evening and welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. We can expect to see showers and some longer spells of rain, but there'll be plenty of dry and bright weather across the country, though it is going to be feeling cold. And the reason for this is that we're dragging in some cold air from the Arctic, and that is spreading its way from the north, moving across the country. As we head into this evening, there'll be plenty of clear spells across England and Wales, and with light winds, there'll be plenty of rural grass frost by the time we reach the morning, even some pockets of mist and fog too. A different story across Scotland though, plenty of cloud and some showers feeding into western areas and a few showers feeding into western coasts of Northern Ireland too, and some blustery winds which is going to take the kick off of those temperatures too. As we head into the start of Friday, there'll still be plenty of cloud across Scotland, plenty of showers, these falling as sleet and snow over the Scottish Highlands, and just a few showers creeping into western coasts of Northern Ireland and northwestern coasts of England and Wales. Otherwise, plenty of dry and bright weather to start Friday. However, it is going to be a cold and crisp start. Generally a cold day on offer across the country, but there'll be plenty of bright sunshine across much of England and Wales. Light winds, so even though temperatures are fairly similar, it should feel more pleasant in the sunshine. Still plenty of cloud across Scotland, those showers merging into longer spells of rain, and still a chance we could see some sleet and snow over mountains. As I say, with lighter winds, it should feel a little bit more pleasant in that sunshine, but it is going to be feeling cold, and blustery winds still moving across Scotland, adding to the chill. And as we start the weekend too, there's still plenty of showers, longer spells of rain, and these moving slowly into across the Scottish borders, northern parts of England, generally turning clearer from the north, but still across England and Wales, plenty of bright sunshine, but another cold day on offer, and still feeling cold over the weekend, but turning milder into next week. Bye for now.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, Suella Braverman, MP and former Home Secretary, was due to go and speak to the Cambridge University Conservative Association. But I'm afraid it was rather difficult because Cambridge for Palestine put out this advertisement saying no platform for the far right. That's Suella, labelled as far right. Well, this apparently was rather effective because the next thing we found out from the outside was that Suella put out this tweet. And there we are. I was due to speak at Cambridge University today, sadly, and you've heard the story before, haven't you? Because of pro-militant, pro-Palestinian protesters and security risks they pose to attendees and me, intimidation and thuggery have no place. Well, we know all that, but you know what? It was cancelled. And then, of course, Cambridge for Palestine then put out a celebratory message saying how pleased they are that they have no platformed her. Too scary for Suella. Well, Suella Braverman joins me down the line right now. Too scary for Suella. That's a really bad sentiment, isn't it?
Evening, Nigel. Cambridge's loss is your gain here on GB News tonight. It's very disappointing, isn't it? Very disappointing that it's got to this state, that a democratically elected politician, former Home Secretary, actually an alumnus of Cambridge University, can't even go and hold a peaceful event whereby I'm talking about politics, topical issues, without the police getting involved, security professionals providing advice, and ultimately the event being cancelled. It's, I'm afraid, a shocking state of affairs of what life is actually like on campus these days.
And, I mean, this clearly has got worse and worse and worse. Is there anything, in your opinion, that the universities themselves could do?
Well, let me tell you about the little episode. So we were due to have the event tonight, right now, as I speak, actually. And 2 days ago, Cambridge for Palestine got wind of my impending arrival at Cambridge. They sent out a message inviting their members to come and protest outside the venue where I was due to speak, Corpus Christi College. At that point, I was very keen to proceed with the event. Let me just make it clear. I can handle the rough and tumble of politics. A few protesters don't faze me. Indeed, Nigel, you and I, we nearly got arrested, didn't we, in Brussels earlier this year because of some overzealous police officers. So we've been there, we've done it. So I wasn't actually concerned. However, subsequently, the police got involved, the university authorities got involved, and other security professionals got involved. They looked into the matter, and their professional advice to the organisers and to myself was that there was a security risk. Our safety couldn't be guaranteed, the risk was unmanageable, and their advice was to cancel the event. Now, when you're getting the professionals putting in quite stark terms their advice like that, you don't ignore it just like that. And it was on that basis that the event was cancelled. But I do think this reflects a broader and more profound issue on campus and indeed throughout society where, you know, if you're on the centre-right, if you're a conservative, if you're pro-Israel, if you want to talk about, certain issues, if you want to talk about immigration, about controlling immigration, you are branded far-right. And these far-left extremists who are frankly out of control because of craven authorities and appeasement, frankly, by those who have power, have become bullies, and they're silencing students on campus, they're silencing academics, and they're creating a very chilling atmosphere whereby freedom of speech is being snuffed out.
How do we get the pendulum to swing back the other way, or do we have to live with this for the foreseeable future?
Well, I mean, I think the government has a lot to answer for. The previous Conservative government had enacted legislation in the form of the Higher Education (Freedom of Speech) Act. It had actually received royal assent and it was due to come into force. But one of the first acts of this disgraceful Labour government was to cancel this piece of legislation without notice, pretty much, certainly without putting it in its manifesto. Now, had that legislation come into force, it would have provided me with the protection. It would have placed obligations on the university authorities to proactively foster an environment of free speech, to protect academics from free debate and the respectful exchange of ideas. Unfortunately, we've lost that piece of legislation, and these authorities, namely the university authorities and indeed the police, can pick and choose. Now, they can all pick and choose who they protect and who they don't protect.
Suella, thank you for coming on the programme, and enjoy a very much quieter evening than otherwise you might have done at Corpus Christi, Cambridge. Thank you. The intolerance is all on the left, isn't it?
No, I think there is a problem with universities that they are risk adverse. And so often they give the advice to cancel the event or don't go ahead with it, when actually a bit of politicians are used to rough and tumble, and I a number of times have gone ahead anyway, despite advice.
But this wasn't just the universities, this was the police that was giving her the advice.
Risk averse is a fair point.
I think there is a risk averse. I mean, I remember when I was at Bradford once, we had someone who had been convicted for terrorism but was coming to talk about how he had taken the wrong path in life, and we had a problem in Bradford, let's be honest. You know, the university at the time, I'm sure it's not a problem now. The university said, no, we don't want anything because we're scared the very presence of him will infringe us. And so in the end, this really important talk for a group of students who were potentially being radicalised was cancelled from the very person that could have spoken.
Well, Jacob's had this. I mean, Jacob's been hounded.
Sorry, forgive me. This is very different. It's not the universities saying, you know, we're risk-averse or thinking they're risk-averse, we don't want any problems. It was the police, it was the security apparatus, the security professionals that said there is danger. And I take it very seriously. I mean, you were in Parliament, I was in Parliament with Joe Cox and David Amess, who I knew.
I mean, I had a live bullet through my door during the Brexit debate, so I was attacked on the street.
We can't pretend the situation today. We can't pretend the situation today is exactly as it was when you were at university, and I was at university 30 years ago. I happened to be at the same university that Suella Braverman was at Cambridge. And I remember in those days, there was protest. I remember when Enoch Powell came, there were people on the left who objected to him. But there was no sense in which his physical security was in danger. People expressed a view and they protested, and he got on and he addressed the
We're in a very bad place.
Whereas today, that isn't the case. It's more menacing and the air, the whiff of violence.
I do think there is an illiberal liberal left that does want to shut down Conservative debate.
I think that there is illiberalism on all sides. I think that you often, and both sides are blind to it either way. You know,
I don't think there are many on the right that want to close down.
It's not balanced. It's not balanced. I mean, you know, if
there are bad people on both sides.
I think lots of pro-Palestinian,
but the emphasis,
lots of pro-Palestinian supporters will say they have been shut down. They can't express their support of Palestine. If they say anything,
not in our universities.
In our universities, that now there is a fear that if they say something pro-Palestinian, they'll be told that they're anti-Semitic.
They can march through the streets of London in their hundreds of thousands, chanting all sorts of things.
I'm afraid this is going back to the two-tier issue. Okay. I mean, I remember at the Cambridge University, there's a portrait of Alpha Balfour that was vandalised. And it had been there hanging on the wall for 90 years. Nobody thought to put it up behind glass because that was a sort of
Balfour, who, to remind our audience,
he
was the man who proposed the setting up of a Jewish state.
Yeah, that's right. And pro-Hamas demonstrator vandalised this portrait. And as far as I understand, there's no.
Or that they were just.
That was the cause in which they were espousing.
Well, no, they were probably espousing a pro-Palestinian cause. Unless they expose pro-Hamas, you can't just. And that is exactly what happened.
It was
people who espouse pro-Palestinian views are pro-Hamas.
I may have misspoken.
And that is what I mean. We've got it wrong on both sides.
Lloyd, that's wrong. Whoever it was, their behaviour's been
totally wrong.
Simply
to vandalise.
Totally wrong.
I'm going to draw stumps. I'm going to draw stumps. I'm going to ask one last quick thought to Kwasi. Robert Jenrick, we learned today in 2023, as Immigration Minister, had a plan that for every person that crossed the Channel, we'd swap them from somebody who'd been given asylum in France. Not quite the same sort of hard, tough Robert Jenrick that we hear today.
So
is he genuine?
I think he is. I think it's easy to.
He's been on a journey.
Yeah, but look, he has been on a journey. But the fact that we know how government works. As the Minister for Immigration, the idea that it was his policy and that it didn't have sign-off from the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister is completely bananas. That's not how government works. The idea that a junior minister in the Home Office is going to have complete power to do a deal like that, I think is nonsense. So if such a deal was going to happen, I don't know what the details are, that would have been signed off also by the Home Secretary, his immediate boss. Yeah. And I'm sure on an issue as contentious as this, the Prime Minister himself would have had a view. I simply cannot believe that it was Robert Jenrick.
Who's going to win?
Who was very difficult. Very difficult.
I know that, that's why I'm asking you.
I think I don't know. It's too close to call. I think Kemi will probably edge.
Who's going to win?
Kemi. I think she's the one that I think can really stoke up excitement in the membership. She could do a misstep in this short time, but I do think that she's the one that gets the people salivating.
There we are.
Let's see.
There we are. Left-wing Labour supporter tips Kemi Badenoch. We can't do better than that. Thank you to my panel for coming in this evening. In a moment, you might remember, going back a little bit, we spoke to Florence Pugh's father, who had a business in Oxford, but was really worried about low traffic zone neighbourhoods. Well, he's had to close a business that's been around for many, many years. He joins me, Clint, in just a moment.
Mark Dolan Tonight. Weekends from 9 p.m.
Harry and Meghan haven't been pictured together for weeks now. Is there trouble in paradise?
Well, I certainly think that they are rethinking some of their past decisions. This is coming from a new piece in the Daily Mail. There is clearly a professional divorce of sorts unraveling before our eyes. And the Daily Mail says it was ultimately Harry's decision because his main objective right now is to be taken seriously in the charity space. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I believe that Harry is finally taking advice from seasoned PR experts that are saying, you know what, your wife's brand is toxic. To me, I don't think Harry would make that decision on his own. He's so stubborn. He sacrificed so much for Meghan, and I can't see him admitting defeat or admitting that he made a mistake. And in allowing PR experts to make these observations and following their direction, his hands are clean, and he won't necessarily get the wrath of Meghan Markle.
Now, Harry reportedly spent his 40th birthday away from Meghan, instead hiking with his friends.
They do say that Meghan Markle is ultimately the one that planned this trip, so maybe we are being too sensitive about this, but seeing him doing his favorite thing in the world, going to Africa, to, the Well Child Awards, I think that is more alarming.
Let's talk about Prince Andrew, who's got a headache. He's on the clock. What's going on?
Yeah, that's right. He is in jeopardy of violating the Crown Estate's lease rules, which specifically outline that repairs on Royal Lodge must be made to the property in regular intervals. Otherwise, they can terminate that lease agreement. The Express reports that the Duke has been given up until the end of the year to prove that he has the financial resources to refurbish Royal Lodge, or he's going to get the boot. He's going to be evicted.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Nana Acquia. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now, one of the areas that we've often debated over the years are low-traffic neighbourhoods, and they appeared, particularly during lockdown, to have just sort of mushroomed all over the country. Well, just over a year ago, Clint Pugh came in to this studio. Welcome back to the studio. We talked about your business on the outskirts of Oxford, a low-traffic zone that had been introduced that was giving a business you'd run for decades problems.
Well, as I explained on your programme last time, the Cowley Road is a particular interesting road. It was a thriving economic hub of evening trade and a large quantity of business, about 150 businesses or so. A third of them are catering leisure industry. And the county council basically blocked 1.2 miles of roads, took away 600 car parking places and single yellow lines without communicating, without doing a business assessment. And, of course, now the damage is being done.
And were there alternatives for people to park their cars?
There aren't any. The biggest point that I'm most frustrated about is that they didn't provide any buses from the Park and Ride. They insist everyone goes into Park and Ride and gets into Oxford, so you'd have to go into Oxford and then get a bus out nearly another mile. Unfortunately, for my premises, they are closer to the centre of Oxford. They're down on the end of the High Street. But unfortunately, the damage is huge. As we did, a survey was done with most of the businesses, and a lot of them were saying that the average came out that their loss of turnover was 42%.
Wow. So Cafe Coco was the particular
Cafe
business.
Coco, I'd had literally, it was sold by the receivers literally a month before its 32nd birthday. But of course, I had worked on it for a year building it. It was very much an Oxford institution. And I had, this is where you learn what all eggs in one basket are. You know, I had 3 restaurants right next to each other and some shop premises. And the biggest thing that the impact of these, trying to create these 5-minute cities, which bizarrely enough, Oxford Council don't want to call it anymore. They used to call it that, but they don't call it anymore. It's the fact that you cannot find 150 managers that live within 5 minutes. So people need to actually commute in. It's impossible to get good quality people. And that's been a large part of the failing, especially of my first restaurant that was taken back by the landlords about a year and a half ago, is because you couldn't get the right managers to run it.
And, you know, perhaps their defence would be, well, maybe your business model was outdated and customers couldn't come anyway.
I think it's a little bit difficult. I'm probably one of the most experienced restaurateurs in Oxford. I've opened about 12 businesses there, all very successful. One of the concepts, Casbah, has always been successful, but it could not support everything and keep it going. You know, the other things, don't forget, this all came in, they craftily drifted it in during COVID, in fact.
Exactly.
You know, they did it without proper consultation, and they're still not communicating properly. They still believe, especially the people that run the highways, the head of the highways in the council still believes there's no proof anyone's lost any money. Well, I've lost about £900,000.
Wow.
You know, my daughter has helped me hugely to the point where she gave me a lot of £1,000 to try and help sell the business. And of course, trouble is, most people don't realise running restaurants is extremely difficult, takes huge amounts of energy. When you get to 65, 66, you haven't created this problem. Of course, it's difficult. And of course,
is this the obsession that Oxfordshire County Council have with doing their bit to combat climate change? Is that what it's about?
Well, it's the same all over the country. You can see it everywhere. You know, it happens in London, it happens everywhere. I was just speaking to a colleague of mine who's down in Cardiff, and he said the same thing's happening there, same thing's happening to Bristol. This is an ideology that was started by the Conservatives, and then the money was funded, and unfortunately these people were let loose. It was like leaving a child in a candy shop with £100, you know, and the decisions go out the window and things are just not done properly. And that is the problem. There is no alternative to get in. You know, I'd like the fact that I've been to meetings and I'm suggesting think outside the box. Maybe we could have cable cars. If you don't, you know, maybe let's have trams. Let's do something.
Trams actually become very popular in some parts of the country.
It would be if you could easily hop on, hop off, and it was at a reasonable cost. But if you expect people to go to the park,
we're all supposed to cycle, you see.
Well, of course, that's never going to happen, isn't it? I find it's very sad in Oxford because all they've done is paint white lines on the side of the road. 95% of all cycle lanes are just a white line on the side of the road. And you see families with their little children. I mean, I wouldn't let my grown-up children cycle in Oxford, let alone a little child. It takes one silly mistake. And, of course, don't forget, in Oxford, you've got electric bikes zipping up and down over the pavements, and cyclists over the pavements, and everyone going through red lights. And I think they probably ought to be registered, and they ought to be insured, might make a sense. At least we could control and try and stop. The damage cannot be just... You can't put the accidents all on the fault of the motorists.
You couldn't put your case more emotively or powerfully, and thank you for coming back and talking about it. And just listen to this, though. An Oxfordshire County Council spokesman said low-traffic neighbourhoods are intended to make residential streets safer, quieter and more comfortable for walking, cycling and wheeling. They are designed to work with other measures to make it easier to get around and improve the health and well-being of our communities.
Well, unfortunately, it now takes me an extra hour a day to get around Oxford. That's a day of your life, working life. What's going to happen to the economy? I mean, I think everyone keeps talking about the economy, but if you don't actually help people get to work, or you stop them from getting to work, and you're then paying all this extra money to drive around, polluting it. Can you imagine the pollution that's in Oxford? It's unbelievable.
Clint Pugh, thank you for coming in.
Many thanks.
Jacob
Thank you for having me.
joins me. He's a fellow cricket fan, and records were falling today.
Amazing day today.
England scored over 800 runs in a Test
Records
match.
that one thought would never be broken, that we should get the fourth highest score in Test cricket. Just phenomenal. Records that have been there since the 1950s. Just quite extraordinary. So I've got Alan Lamb on to talk about that.
Love Lamb.
I'm also going to be revealing who I'm backing in the Tory leadership.
Yes.
That's not you, because unfortunately you're not eligible.
No.
You never know when the parties are reunited, but until that time, I'm going to be announcing who I'm supporting for leadership.
Right, and that'll come, I'm guessing you're going to say that pretty much immediately.
No, that'll come at about 8:20. So first of all, I'm talking about how Labour's ruining the economy.
Right.
Because that is fundamental. The threat of 25 billion extra taxation and making the economy less efficient by workers' rights. It's the same, actually, this hostility to the motorist you're talking about. All of that makes the economy fail. Every time you put a regulation on small business, you make the economy fail.
Yeah.
And that's what Labour's doing.
Yeah, I'm afraid that's right. I think whatever happens in the budget, I think small businesses are going to have a very, very tough time, whether it's the budget, employment legislation or whatever else it may be. Well, Jacob, thank you. So there you are. The Mog is teasing. He's teasing you. He won't say which of the last two he's going to back. I think I know, but I won't spoil it. So I'll say good night for this evening, and let's have a look at the weather with Hannah Criswick.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening and welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. We can expect to see showers and some longer spells of rain, but there'll be plenty of dry and bright weather across the country, though it is going to be feeling cold. And the reason for this is that we're dragging in some cold air from the Arctic, and that is spreading its way from the north, moving across the country. As we head into this evening, there'll be plenty of clear spells across England and Wales, and with light winds, there'll be plenty of rural grass frost by the time we reach the morning, even some pockets of mist and fog too. A different story across Scotland though, plenty of cloud and some showers feeding into western areas and a few showers feeding into western coasts of Northern Ireland too, and some blustery winds which is going to take the kick off of those temperatures too. As we head into the start of Friday, there'll still be plenty of cloud across Scotland, plenty of showers, these falling as sleet and snow over the Scottish Highlands, and just a few showers creeping into western coasts of Northern Ireland and northwestern coasts of England and Wales. Otherwise, plenty of dry and bright weather to start Friday. However, it is going to be a cold and crisp start. Generally a cold day on offer across the country, but there'll be plenty of bright sunshine across much of England and Wales, light winds, so even though temperatures are fairly similar, it should feel more pleasant in the sunshine. Still plenty of cloud across Scotland, those showers merging into longer spells of rain, and still a chance we could see some sleet and snow over mountains. As I say, with lighter winds, it should feel a little bit more pleasant in that sunshine, but it is going to be feeling cold, and blustery winds still moving across Scotland, adding to the chill. And as we start the weekend too, there's still plenty of showers, longer spells of rain, and these moving slowly into across the Scottish borders, northern parts of England, generally turning clearer from the north, but still across England and Wales, plenty of bright sunshine, but another cold day on offer, and still feeling cold over the weekend, but turning milder into next week. Bye for now.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You really could be our next big winner with an incredible £36,000 in tax-free cash in your bank account. But what does it feel like to be a Great British Giveaway winner?
So I just text as you do and then forgot about it.
Well, I didn't believe it at first. I just thought, somebody's trying to wind me up.
You never expect to win something like that.
Definitely get you interested. If I can win it, anybody can win it.
For another chance to win £36,000 in tax-free cash,